My guest today is Mike Salguero. Mike is the founder of ButcherBox. He's also the CEO, where he's grown the company in the last 7 years from $0 to $550 million. But what impressed me so much about Mike in this conversation wasn't just the revenue that he's hit, but also how he's building a more conscious world using his company. I had an incredible time with this, and I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation with Mike Salguero. This episode is brought to you by My First Million. My First Million is one of my favorite podcasts. It's one I recommend all the time, and I would recommend to you even if they weren't paying me to say this. And that's because it's two creators and two entrepreneurs who have sold their companies, and they talk about the latest in business and technology. It always keeps me well informed, and they're such interesting, funny, thought-provoking people that Sam and Sean are. So check out that podcast, My First Million, wherever you listen, on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts, wherever. You could check them out. My First Million. Enjoy this conversation with Mike Salguero. Mike, thank you for coming on the podcast. Really inspired by your story. Been listening to you in my ears for the past, week straight, nonstop. It's been all great stuff. So thank you for coming here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So I'd love to start with selling peanuts. And what did that experience teach you? And how did that experience with sales impact you and your journey?
So I was a walking vendor at Fenway Park, and so what you need to do first and foremost is have a good cheer. So mine was peanut, and the way it worked is you basically chose your product based on seniority. You got to choose your product every day. So I didn't always have peanuts. Sometimes I had like Diet Coke. Sometimes I had water. Sometimes I had hot dogs. And, I think one of the, I'm a big believer in sales, sales being a really important thing for people to do at some point in their life. Because with sales, you get to realize that hustle equals dollars. And unlike a lot of other professions where you could work super hard, but you don't really make any more money, in sales, if you're working harder, you're making more. And so when I was at Fenway Park, if I was running around acting like a fool, I made a lot more money. And I did that. I did it at Fenway Park, also worked at the Boston Garden, also worked at Gillette Stadium. So really got around the Boston area, hawking stuff at games.
What inspired you to do that?
I mean, honestly, I got to Boston in 1999. And I was at Boston University, and I pretty quickly was like, this is not going to be very hard. Like academically, I didn't feel like it was going to be very hard for me. And I didn't really care about school that much. So I decided I was going to make the city my education and just start getting jobs and working. And I ended up by my freshman winter, I was working full time between all the different gigs and jobs I had. And there was a friend that I met who was a security guard there, and at the Boston Garden. I tried to go work as a security guard, and they were like, you can't be a security guard, but you can be a walking vendor. And I was like, oh, cool. So that's how I ended up. I did that there. I used to sell chipwiches, and I could throw a chipwich like from the floor up into the 300 level, like way up, which was amazing. So I could huck those chipwiches, which was a ton of fun. And then I'd have a tennis ball, and you cut a hole in it, and you can throw the tennis ball up, and they stick the money in the tennis ball and then throw it back to you. But just being innovative around selling chipwiches and hustling was definitely a big part of my college career.
It's hilarious because did you know at that point in your life that you were going to be an entrepreneur?
I think so. When I was growing up, so I had a paper route when I was 10 years old. I was always interested in hustling for money. And when I got to college, I definitely was looking for ways to do my own thing. I grew up the youngest of four, with no dad, just a single mom. And I very much did not really listen to rules or things. I felt like things didn't apply to me. And so, I definitely, I think entrepreneurship, helps people who might not fit in or don't play by the rules. It helps them to build a career. When I got to college, I started in the business school at BU, and I remember like freshman year, they were like, if you don't have an internship at an investment bank this summer, like you're not going to make it. And I actually ended up leaving the business school over that remark because I was like, I don't want to work at an investment bank. I want to do my own thing. So really, it started really gelling in college that I was going to be out on my own.
You kind of brushed over the fact that you grew up without a dad. How did that experience shape you?
Oh, geez. I mean, how much time do you have? Quite a bit. So I was born in Paraguay. And my parents got divorced when I was 4 months old. My mom moved up with my 3 siblings and me, and we grew up in a super small town in Massachusetts, which was right next to my mother's grandparents. And that was kind of like the only family that was stable enough for us to like go live with or live by. Growing up, I always believed my father was going to come back. And it wasn't really until high school that I realized that was not, he's not coming back. I think deep down, like if I look at like my drive and determination and how much striving I did as a young person and I do today, a lot of it had to do with trying to win my father's love, which I never got. And you know, now as a father, I'm a father of 3. I missed a lot. Like I wasn't really held with love. I wasn't like talked to by a father. And it definitely has left a mark on me that will not go away. You know, I have deep concerns about being abandoned, whether that's my wife leaving me or even if someone comes to me at the company and is like, hey, Mike, can we talk? I'm like, oh, shit, they're leaving. That's like the first thing that comes into my head. And so, but as I've gotten older, one, I've built a deep appreciation for what he was going through and also for who it made me. And I've forgiven him, which is, I think, really important. And I also am at least able to notice when my mind goes to a place of like, oh, you're going to be abandoned, rather than just be hijacked by it.
Why do you think that some people have that same situation, but they're able to transform into a positive versus a negative? What separates the people like you who can use that situation as a force to propel them to do greater things?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, well, first and foremost, my mother never really allowed us to use the lack of a father as a crutch or as an excuse. So growing up, there were these like talk shows like Phil Donahue and Ricky Lake, and like you'd get these people on there that are just like clowns, and they're like, "Well, I grew up without a father, and that's why I am the way I am." And my mother would turn to us and be like, "You're never allowed to say that."
Wow.
And that has both been deeply damaging because I like, you know, I'm 41 years old and I barely allow myself to be like, well, maybe the fact I grew up without a father was part of like the reason why I'm messed up in this situation. Because I'm still remembering my mom being like, you're never going to blame him. You know, it's but also there was just kind of this, I don't know, I guess it's somewhat of like an immigrant mentality of like, you're going to make it. Doesn't like, sorry, that can't be what's going to prevent you from trying to make it. And so, I always looked at it as something that shaped me, but and now as I've gotten older, I'm like really realizing the positive benefits of growing up without a father versus the just the negative side.
What has allowed you to realize some of the more positive aspects?
Yeah, I mean, so I worked with a coach, one of these like Tony Robbins coaches, like 6 years ago, and he he was like, all right, you need to like write a letter to your father and you need to try to forgive him. And so I sat for a while and tried to figure out, like, I'm not going to forgive this guy. Like, he wasn't around. I always wanted him there. And, what happened was I had kids, and I started thinking about things from his perspective. And, my oldest brother, when my mom left my dad, was 8 years old, which is the same age as my oldest daughter. And to think about the pain that it would cause me if my wife left right now and moved to a different continent, I started realizing, as I thought about that pain, I started realizing, you know what? I might do the exact same thing, which is just turn my back and walk in the other direction. Mm. And through a series of interesting events, like my father's mother, my grandmother, passed away. He wrote me an email just letting me know. And this was like 3 days after I had written the letter. And so I was like, oh, thanks for writing me. He hadn't written me in like 6 years.
Wait, so let me get this right. You wrote this letter and then you and then you get a letter back?
I got an email. Well, I didn't actually send the letter.
But I just
wrote it. And then 3 days later, he's like, hey, just want to let you know that your grandmother died. And like, if you want to talk about it, we can talk about it.
And that was the first connection?
No, I sought him out right after school. So I graduated in 2003, and I went to South America to live with him for 3 months because I wanted to like learn who this person is who's half of me. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was 2003. I think we talked maybe once or twice, and when he notified me, it was like 2016, 2017.
Wow.
Right? So like big gap. So he's like, your grandmother died, just want to let you know, and we can get on the phone and talk about it if you want. And I was like, oh yeah, let's get on the phone. So we got on the phone, and I basically read him the letter.
Wow.
I was like, I just want to let the main point of the letter was that I spent my upbringing and high school, college, always taking the position of the abandoned boy as like the victim, like I wanted you home, you were never home, and I never thought about it from his perspective. And when I consider the amount of pain and sadness he must have been going through to lose his entire family and have them move away and like basically never be in contact with them again, it's like, oh, like that feels more painful than what I had to go through. And so it just gave me a completely different perspective on the whole thing, to the point where, I had a lot of compassion for him. I told him like, I forgive you. And he's like, I don't need your forgiveness. I just want a relationship with you. And I was like, that sounds great. Let's hang out. And then 4 months later, he died.
Oh my God.
So it was like, the universe conspired to have me, first of all, be asked to write a letter, write the letter, then actually get on the phone with him, like kind of put a pin in it. And then he passed away. Yeah, I feel really blessed that like that, all of that happened to get me to like kind of process and work through it. And when you have an experience like that, you can only, I only look at it like this is just here for my learning. This is here for me to grow in consciousness. And like, while I'm always open to like how I'm being hijacked, it helps me kind of compartmentalize like, oh, that's just because you have this deep father wound that is not going to go away.
What about your siblings? How did they react to the same situation?
Pretty well. Yeah. We've all got our wounds. But I think, all of my siblings are well adjusted and have their own families and did not go off the deep end, so to speak. We were blessed with both a mom who was very loving and supportive, as well as an extended family, like my mom's siblings and my grandparents, her parents, my grandparents, all of whom really rallied around us for years. I mean, I had several uncles that really became father figures for me. You know, like I remember my Uncle Steve teaching me how to shave, you know, just like these things that like, how do you even know how to do if somebody doesn't show you? But really taking me under their wing, yeah, you know, kind of pushing me. So I had people in my life who were looking out for me, and I had men in my life who were looking out for me. And I think, without that, I don't know how it would have turned out, but, you know, fortunately it turned out decently.
I can't help but also connect the situation that happened 6 years ago to ButcherBox, which was started 7 years ago.
Yep.
And has grown exponentially. How has closing that loop in a way transformed yourself personally, the company, your family? Like, how did that one situation impact all three of those buckets?
Yeah, one of the things that I love about entrepreneurship, it's actually the top thing I love about entrepreneurship. And really, it's not just entrepreneurship, it's leadership in general in any sort of circumstance, is you get to learn all of these things about yourself and about like your own, like what makes you tick, like what are the demons in your head, like how do you operate in the world? So I'm a big believer in the Enneagram, which I don't know if you know much about. And it's kind of like a personality test, but it's not. There are 9 different types, and the Enneagram helps you to really understand what the snake in your head is trying to tell you and trying to lie to you about. And
what number are you?
I'm a 7.
Gotcha.
The glutton, or the adventurer, depending on how you want to look at it. So I think like I look at running a company as a step in trying to awaken to myself and to become more conscious in the world. And
did you always view it that way?
I guess not always, but certainly over the past, for the ButcherBox journey, yes, absolutely.
When did that transition happen of you viewing entrepreneurship as a way to become more conscious?
Yeah, I guess it was. So I for a long time I was part of EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, which is like a organization of people over $1 million in revenue. And you can both do events like chapter events, but you also get this forum experience where you sit around with 7 or 8 other people and just like kind of talk about deep stuff. Really started there. And then I moved to YPO, which is for people with over $20 million in revenue. And as part of YPO, I met a woman, Diana Chapman, who runs the Conscious Leadership. And that's where things really started ramping up in terms of like a real focus on being conscious, and a focus on like how much of your day gets hijacked by like your deep, you know, the stuff inside of you. Mm-hmm. And really it's a practice of like noticing, so and allowing it to be there, but also to like not let it hijack you. The best analogy I give people is like a lot of people have meditated before, and some are like, well, I'm really bad at meditation. We're all bad at meditation. And, you know, the practice with meditation is like you clear your mind and just focus on your breath, and then your mind wanders like immediately. And then you're like, all right, let me bring it back. And then your mind wanders, and then you bring it back, and you're just trying to gently bring it back. You don't get super mad at yourself that your mind wanders. The whole idea is that you're really gentle with it. That's the same with like my abandonment wound, right? Like instead of being like, damn it, Mike, like why do you always do this? You're always worried about whatever. I am like, the practice is to just like gently be like, there's that abandonment wound again. Let's just get back to center. Let's get back to center. And noting that your mind is just gonna keep going. There's no way to stop it. It's just self-acceptance and like recognizing that that's a piece of you and letting that piece of you like really come out rather than stuffing it down.
I like to tell people like try to think about your next thought. What is your next thought going to be? We are thinking constantly, but we have so little control oftentimes of what our actual next thought is going to be. And when you sit down with yourself, by yourself, you realize, oh, I didn't choose that thought. It just arose. And I think there's also something that I noticed in your interviews when I was listening to this. It was like an undercurrent excuse me, an undercurrent of kindness that keeps popping up. And it just struck me as like, oh, this is somebody who spent a lot of time with themselves and trying to understand their own psychology in a way. And where did that journey start? The journey of meditation, the journey of being kind to yourself.
I mean, I would not say that I'm kind to myself. That's a little too generous for where I feel like I am today, at least. I definitely still get very triggered. I'm definitely very hard on myself. A lot less hard than I used to be, but I'm still hard on myself. I don't know. I've just always been a pretty driven human being. Growing up, I would say my like number one way that I had fun was competing. And I didn't really care what it was. It could be like a game of cards or a Nintendo game or a flag football game or anything in between. Like I wanted to win. And constantly drove myself to like try to win. I remember I got a report card in like third grade that said something like, Mike seems more interested in finishing the test first than he does getting a good grade. So I just became pretty compulsive with like being the best. But it never really was like about getting the best grades. It was really like, I don't know, in this kind of small band of where I felt like I could be the best. And then as I got out of school, I really I wanted to make a lot of money.
Why was that the drive?
Yeah, but I wanted to make a lot of money. I had a good buddy, Seth, who was co-founder of my first company, and we both had this dream of like, let's make a lot of money and then let's give it all away. Like it didn't have anything to do with like, I don't know, big fancy house or like lavish lifestyle. I live pretty like frugally, and I don't really love spending money, but the dream of like giving it all away was pretty cool. I've always been really driven. And the interesting thing is like what happens now, right? So like 7 years into ButcherBox, we've grown a company that's going to do around 600 million this year in revenue. I'm happy to talk about the whole journey, but like for a while it was like, I'm going to prove that I can just have a hobby business and be successful. And then it was like, okay, that's done. I'm going to prove that I can run this to $100 million and not raise outside funding. And it's like, okay, that's done. And it's like, all right, I'm going to build a huge company. It's like, okay, that's done. Like, and at what point, like, are you just like, this is great, instead of putting some other goalpost? Now I'm like, well, I want to run this thing to $1 billion in revenue, because going from 0 to $1 billion would be amazing, unfunded. And, it's like, what happens when you hit that? Are you just going to have 2 billion? Like when does it end, man? And I think like, I don't know. I try to hold all these things a little less tightly than I used to.
Yeah. I want to help people understand where exactly this comes from. So year one, $300,000 in revenue. Year two, $5 million. Year three, $33 million. Year four, $100 million. Year five, $225 million. Year six, $450 million. Year seven, $550 million in revenue.
Yep.
That's pretty remarkable. But it's also cool hearing how your own mind has changed about the very thing you're doing while staying consistent in doing it. For example, when you're just starting out, you're saying, oh, I just want to have a lifestyle business. This is just a lifestyle business. And it's almost like it became something, it's almost like a thought in a way, where you didn't choose the thought that you were having. It just happened and you're like, all right, like now what do I do with this thought?
Yeah.
Right? So
yeah, I'm a big believer that companies have a mind of their own. And, my first company we worked on for 7.5 years, I worked way harder than I do at ButcherBox, and it didn't work. Like it just didn't work. With ButcherBox, like ButcherBox wanted to be something bigger than I ever dreamed of. Like this was supposed to be a hobby. This was not supposed to be this massive company. And, you know, you can say that that's God. You can say that that's whatever, just like, I don't know, a weird circumstances. But when I look at it, I'm like, look, this doesn't just happen. Like, this is pretty rare.
Yeah.
And we sit in this position where we're a huge player. We've made a lot of, like, we do a lot of revenue. We serve a lot of customers. And we do it profitably with no outside investors. And so where my mind goes is like, okay, but for what? And really what I believe is we have an opportunity to change the meat industry, which is in dire need of change. And we are changing the meat industry, but we have like a bigger purpose than I ever dreamed. And that purpose found me. Like, I didn't find it. It found me.
Why change the meat industry?
I mean, the meat industry, in my opinion, is pretty broken. So if you think about the vast majority of animals raised in this country, so let's talk about beef, chicken, pork, live in fairly horrific conditions, are in confined feeding operations called CAFOs, and really have little to no quality of life. There's so bad for the animals. The farmers, for the most part, have been taken advantage of for years. Can't make a living, are going under. Suicide rates are highest they've ever been, and the highest profession. The number of farms closing is just out of this. I don't know the number. I don't want to quote the number, but it's like very high. The number of farms that are being lost on a daily basis. And farming animals has essentially become a money-losing proposition. So bad for the farmer. There are a ton of environmental concerns about raising animals, specifically raising animals in the confined feeding way. So bad for the environment. And then the reason why I got into this business was my wife has a thyroid condition, and we were following all these elimination diets from all these like doctors and nutritionists, and they were all saying eat grass-fed beef because of the health benefits and because it's so much better for you than conventional. So the current situation is bad for the human eating it as well. And so it's bad for the animal, bad for the human, bad for the environment, and bad for the farmer. It's a broken system. And I like to say that we agree with vegetarians, but I want to continue eating meat, and I believe in a world where people are eating meat. We're just trying to flop the system on its head. And the good news is that because of our growth, as well as us publicly talking about what we're trying to do or where we're trying to go, is a lot of companies are like waking up and saying, okay, like, yeah, we'll work with you. Let's build out a program, or let's do this, or let's do that, which has been really exciting. Like we're seeing a ton of traction, which is great because at least in grass-fed beef is 2% of the overall beef consumed in this country. Just 2%. 98% is essentially the way I just described. So there's a lot of headroom to make. And it's a big problem. And I think we are well positioned to actually be the company that pushes that change forward, which is like, I never expected to be saying that. Like, I just thought I was going to run a little hobby business, side hustle, have 1,000 subscribers paying me a $20 profit. And like, that was it. This was not like, oh my goodness, we could actually like put a dent in one of the largest, most entrenched and arguably backwards industries in this country. Like that's a freaking huge undertaking, and also incredibly exciting. Like that just, I don't know, fires me up.
It's funny because you've said before that people don't think enough about lifestyle design. They think too much about business plans.
Yes.
But it's interesting because the lifestyle design of changing the meat industry is entirely different than the lifestyle design of having 1,000 customers paying you $20.
Totally.
Right.
Totally.
So like, how do you reconcile that difference, and when did it start to change?
Yeah. So I've said a few times recently on some podcasts that I believe that entrepreneurs spend way too much time on business plan and not nearly enough time on lifestyle design. And lifestyle design, the way that I think people should do it is you look at your life 3 years in the future and you're like, you try to have a vision, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, where am I waking up? Who am I waking up next to, if anybody? What does my house look like? Do I have kids? Am I doing a hard workout in the morning? What time am I waking up? Am I going to the office? What does the office look like? How many people are there? Like kind of just going through the whole thing, right? And so I wrote down my vision for like my lifestyle as well as for ButcherBox for 3 years in the future. And when we hit the 3-year mark and I looked at it, there was a lot that was like dead on accurate and a lot that was not accurate. More was dead on accurate. And then I did that again for ButcherBox, did another 3-year vision. And I've done that again after that 3 years. Interestingly, it's funny you bring this up because I've been thinking like over the past week, I'm like, I keep saying entrepreneurship is all about lifestyle design, but have I like reconciled what I want out of my lifestyle right now? And I haven't, to be honest. Like I'm kind of, going through the motions. And I actually, at one of the things I want to do, I do a lot of like reflecting and planning around the new year. I want to sit down and write my next lifestyle design because I still have pretty stringent, like I don't want to travel a lot. I've got a young family. I want to work out a ton. I definitely prioritize my lifestyle still. Have lots of hobbies, etc. But I haven't written it down, and so I think that's a missing opportunity that I hope to rectify.
Well, take us through that process. How does one say to themselves, like, what are the questions we asked? You kind of went through it,
yeah.
But what's in a systematic way? How should one approach lifestyle design, particularly as we enter the new year?
Yeah. So, well, I think it'll be a little bit different for me than it would be for like a normal person who's thinking about being an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's going to be more like, how can I quiet myself? Like go spend a day walking in the woods or whatever with a pen and paper and just try to like get some bullet points or some like just some vision around like what does it look like for me? I think for the average like wannabe entrepreneur who's like working somewhere and thinking about like what do they want, or thinking about a business to start. Again, usually they're spending a lot of time thinking about the business. Like, oh, what if I do a media company, or what if I do this, or what if I do that, and not like, well, what do you want? And so I think the first couple things. One is you need to quantify your nut. So very few people actually like, it's like, well, I need to make all this money. And it's like, well, do you really like calculate it? Like, what do you need? Okay, I need rent, I need this, I need that. And you just come up with your list. So when I started ButcherBox, I, just calculated my nut, whatever my nut was. And I knew I had to cover that, but I had some savings. So it was like, I don't need to cover that right away, but I know I need to cover that eventually. So first is like understand kind of what the financial obligation is. How much time do you have to make it, et cetera. Then there's kind of like your daily routine. So are you going to an office? Are you not? Are you working out? Are you not? Are you meditating? Are you not? Are you what are you doing? Right. Then I think there's also like the feelings that you're having. So kind of like you do something and you feel a lot of joy and energy around this. So you want to do more of it. I think hobbies, travel, adventure, exploration, like try to layer that into like the overall picture. Running a company or being an entrepreneur, if you don't check yourself, it very quickly becomes a 24/7, 365 endeavor. And unfortunately, a lot of what is being taught to entrepreneurs right now is this idea of hustle culture. Like you need to bust your ass. Like this is, you have to put everything on the line. And again, I think that's a lie too. I think usually that's because there isn't a plan in place. Like if you don't have, at least for me, I'll talk for myself. If I don't have a plan or something written down, I tend to not be operating in a way that like is in accordance with what I want. I need to be like, this is what I'm looking for. I'm going to write it down. Now let me get after it.
So when doing research for this, I found out that you've taken Fridays off.
Yes.
Since you started ButcherBox.
Yeah.
What went into that decision? How has that played a critical role in the development of the company?
Yeah. So I mean, I say I don't work on Fridays, but that's not really true. I don't take meetings on Fridays, and I wasn't going to the office on Fridays. But I'm always working, right? Like, at least in my head. So what happened was, my first company, I just worked my ass off. I mean, I was generally trying to be the first one in the office, last one to leave. We would more often than not be working on Saturdays, and we'd go around the office on Friday, like, hey, you coming in tomorrow? Like, just try to like get as many people in as possible. And it didn't work. And so this time around, a couple things happened. One, my first daughter was born. When I started ButcherBox, she was 7 months old. And my wife was back at work, and it was like, okay, on Friday, do we want a nanny? Or, and I was like, no, I'll take her. And so it became time with my daughter, which then became time. Then we had twins 2 years later. So then it became time with my 3 daughters. And, the impact on the company was actually pretty amazing. What happened was, a lot of the early people, had to make decisions on their own instead of using me as their crutch. And that was really helpful, because it helped people like step into more responsibility than I think they were probably thinking that they deserved or that they wanted. And so I think it's only been upside, to be honest. Like, it's been, and obviously, like, there are times where I have, something happens and I have to take a phone call. And that used to be the case when I was taking care of my girls. I'd be like, all right, I have to get on the phone for a little bit, or I'd bring them to like a lunch meeting or whatever. But not working Fridays was a really critical kind of like line in the sand that I drew really early on.
How many people work for ButcherBox?
It's about 215.
Okay, 215 people. What are some of the most effective hiring practices that you found that you don't think other people might not be aware of? I've just started hiring some people for this podcast, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I hire effectively? And I'm curious if you have any insight for somebody just going from 0 to 1.
Yeah, totally. So I think one of the really important things when you're hiring, like before you hire, is, can you write down your core values? Generally 4 or 5 core values that you have as a company and that you want to have as a company and that you want the people who come into the company to embody. Not as important as you go from 0 to 1, but certainly if you have like 5 employees, 7 employees, and you think like, oh, we're going to keep scaling up, you want to make sure that you write down your core values. Best way to do that when you have 5 to 7 people, like if it's just yourself, you just kind of like figure some stuff out and write it down. If you're like 5 to 7 people, you just kind of get in a room and you talk about like what makes us unique and special. Like, what do we think that we bring to the table that others might not? And then you try to like distill that down to like, 5 core values. Then you only hire people who fit those, which sometimes is hard. Sometimes you have like really talented people who really fit like exactly what you're looking for. But you say no because they don't follow your core values.
Have you ever changed somebody? Meaning like they had 4 or 5, and then the 5th one, you could get them on board? No, has never happened?
It doesn't happen.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it doesn't happen. So we actually screen people on all the core values. Like we have different, in the interview process, we have different people responsible for the different questions. Wow. And some of them are like really theoretical, like humble is one of our core values. Like, how do you sniff out humility or authenticity? How do you sniff that out? Especially in an interview where people are nervous or like they're trying to show up a certain way. It's, these are hard things to like screen for. But you have to put your name as part of the interviewing committee. You have to put your name down on like, I screen for humility. So it's like, hey, this person's super unhumble. Like, what happened here? Like those types of conversations would happen.
How do you make humble into something to screen for? Like, what is the question that you would ask to screen for humility?
Honestly, for me, humility is, I don't even ask anything. Like, so for one, it's like an approach on things like how they talk about, whether they talk about themselves or their team. Like, I did this, I did this, I did this, or like, we did this, we did this, we did this, is a totally different approach. Also things like super simple, like if you come to an office and we're hanging out and you leave your coffee cup like on the table and just walk out. Like, I don't think that's a humble move. Like, I want somebody, who's not afraid to wash a dish. Or at least be like, hey, where do I put this? And then we're like, oh, don't worry about it. And like yeah. So not a lot of, I don't really have a lot of questions around humility that I would ask. I think it's a tough one to ask about. Just on your other thing on strategies for hiring people. The other one that like we did quite effectively at ButcherBox, which was new to me, is I call it the barbell strategy. And it's this idea of pairing really young people with not a lot of experience, but a ton of like heart and grit with really old people at the back end of their career. Like, either they retired and they're coming out of retirement, or like last job before retirement. What we found was that the people at the tail end of their career had so much more experience than kind of like your standard person, like 30 years more experience. I remember I was at an event and my meat guy was there, and Blue Apron's meat guy was there. And my meat guy, was literally 30 years older than the Blue Apron's like head of meat purchasing.
Wow.
And it's like, who do you think's getting a better deal? Like, I mean, it's, so where it matters, where experience matters, is a great place to bring in people who have like a ton of decades more experience than you'd normally think.
Yeah, I love how you search meat on LinkedIn to find your meat guy from Omaha Steaks. That was a great story.
Yeah.
What are the other values? You said humility.
Oh, for us?
You said authenticity.
Yep.
I'm curious what the other.
So that's kind of like how we want you to show up: humble and authentic. And then we have like, how do you approach the business? One is accountable, and one is relentless improvement. So accountable is like, do you do what you say you're going to do? And also it's a mark on us. Like, we have accountability to like the greater world. We're B Corp certified. Like, there's a bunch of things with accountable. Relentless improvement is currently, I would say, my favorite core value. Relentless improvement is this idea that the work is never done. Like, you're always trying to improve. And what that does is it gives permission to launch things maybe early, or to not be fully satisfied with an experience, but you're like, that's fine, we're just going to improve it. It's also great for like operational efficiency and cost cutting, and like, relentless improvement is just this constant, like, let's improve. Also, that like is near and dear to my heart, because I'm always personally trying to like relentlessly improve myself, and hacking and trying to figure stuff out. And then the last one is what it's actually being changed right now, but member obsessed. And we're moving it to customer obsessed, because we are in retail now, and those aren't members. So yeah, we're broadening it.
It reminds me of Jeff Bezos talking about how the customer is the most important from very early start. Now, what went into the decision to move into retail?
So we're in retail now. Although the ramp up is, it's picking up some speed, but we're being very cautious. We're trying to get 20 stores to start and just like learn, and then if that works, then we just grow it. And we're doing a lot of like specialty stores and markets and convenience stores and stuff like that, rather than like kind of big box retail, although that's on the list as well. The reason why we're getting into retail is, if you run the numbers, So despite huge gains in online grocery shopping in COVID, right? So it went from like 7% to 11.4%. So right now, 11.4% of people regularly buy groceries online. But if you actually then take a double click into that, the percentage of those people who are like click and collect is like 75%. Either click and collect or like Instacart. So basically your grocery shopping is just like you outsource the actual shopping part, and it's just, so what's left is about 25% of the 11.4% are people that are getting a box like delivered to their house using like FedEx, UPS, whatever. And so that's where we would fit in. So you're talking about like 3% of the overall population.
Wow.
Then you're like, okay, what percentage of those people want claims-based meat, right? Meat that's raised to a higher standard, et cetera. And I mean, it's anyone's guess. It's generally 20% of the population, but like, I don't know, 50%, who knows, right? It's some fraction of that. So let's say it's 50%. Now you're down to 1.5% of the households in the United States that would be a ButcherBox customer. We've already shipped a box to almost that number.
Wow.
So it's like, oh, we're kind of at the tail end of our total addressable market. Now, if you rewind all the way back, where the majority of purchasing is happening is in the grocery store. And so what's really interesting for us is like, we advertise all over the place. We advertise on podcasts. We advertise on TV. We do a lot of like display stuff. We're kind of all over the place. If you think about like when I run an ad during an NBA game, if it's true that only 1.5% of the people watching are like likely to purchase online, it's like, how do I make my ads more effective? Well, go where they're shopping, which is why we started moving into retail. Totally different business, though. It's like, it's remarkable how different of a business being in the grocery store is. From a margin perspective, from just like getting a deal done perspective, it's a different beast. It moves differently.
Is it almost like starting at day one?
A little bit, yeah. It is almost like starting at day one. But that's exciting for me because I kind of miss being able to be at day one, as going back to lifestyle design as an entrepreneur. I'm very much like an entrepreneur, like a go-getter, like go, 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 go. And that's a lot easier to do when we're placing freezers, right? It's like, how many do we get this week? Okay, what's the plan for next week? Like versus what is now a very large battleship that is ButcherBox, where we have to be a lot more cautious about what we do because we're just, whether it's, hey, let's launch this feature. Like, well, we can't just launch the feature. We have to like actually properly stage it and test it and make sure it works and like A/B test it on the way in, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we can't just like, it's not the Wild West anymore. And I miss that. I miss the Wild West.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to have more things in my day that feel that way, that feel more Wild Westish, because that gives me a lot of energy.
Yeah. You mentioned relentless improvement as one of the most important core values for the company and yourself. I'm curious where you yourself have felt like you've relentlessly improved the most over, let's say, the past 5 years.
Where have I relentlessly improved the most over the last 5 years? Well, I would say the whole walk of waking up in consciousness is like is a big one. Like I'm a lot more awake now than I was 5 years ago. And a lot less focused on like numbing myself with whatever, substances or whatever I was doing kind of back then versus now is very, very different. And then, I do think that my most important job is being a father, and it's been longer than 5 years, but my youngest twins are 6. I had so much head trash around being a dad, especially because I didn't have a dad. Like, I don't know how to be a father. Opening my heart to like what that means, and then like loving my kids through, a lot of whatever that they show up, how they show up. And I just have to love them through that, has been something I've gotten better at, I would say. And that work, as I understand it, gets harder as you as you go forward. So.
What's something that you wish more parents would understand as a parent yourself?
Oh, so I read this book this summer, and it was like blew my mind. It's called The Conscious Parent. Really good. And it says, which is like just blown my mind. Basically, like, there's nothing wrong with your kid. Like, your job is to help them find their beautiful light and spirit within, whatever that is, and like that's your job. Anything else, like, so the things that they do that bother you, the things that they do that you think is wrong, the things that they do that make you want to yell at them or make you yell at them, those are actually all lessons for you. And those are lessons that help you to wake up to consciousness, like wake up to how you were raised or some unprocessed thing from your past or whatever. I think that's just like, it blew my mind. I'm like, oh man, like, cause I get, one of my big things is, being late. Hate being late. And I just like, I start freaking out on my girls about the fact that like, it's like, hey, we got to go. And they're just like sitting on the floor, and it's like, like I could pull my hair out. I'm just like, yeah, I don't know. I go to like a dark place, and, reflecting on that, like, we were always late when I was growing up because my mom was a single mom with 4 kids, and I used to like really hold it against her. Like it used to be one of the things that I really despised about my mother was she was not like put together enough to get us all to a place on time. And so it's like, it's just like, oh, wow, well, that's a wound that, is now impacting how I raise my kids. The other like piece of, I don't know, parent advice I got from a really good friend, Jimbo Walsh. Kids spell love Time. I think that's really important. And I think, a lot of people, entrepreneurs, people who are focused on the hustle, like, and I was doing this in my first company for, like, it's just like, well, I got to work. And the years go by quick. And I think, being present, is incredibly important. Like, I could be on a plane every week, the amount of things I get invited to, the amount of things that like, and I don't think I'm something special. Like, I think everyone is in the same situation where it's like, you could be traveling all the time. You could be out multiple nights a week at some sort of like get together or, whatever. And it's just really like, well, is that actually going to do anything for me? Is that going to help? And I think, trying to limit just like try to spend as much time with your kids as possible.
I heard Ryan Holiday say something really interesting, which is like, I think Austin Kleon gave him the advice that you can choose 3 kids, or 2 out of the 3 kids, career, and parties.
That's good.
And I like that a lot. It sounds very similar to what you're experiencing as well, and I think there are times when you don't have kids where I'm thinking to myself, I don't have kids. So I'm thinking about
parties and career.
Exactly.
Parties and career.
It's like, I'm not going to have this forever. And it made me more appreciative of the fact. So yeah, it's a cool little aside from Ryan. I want to switch gears here and talk about the personal branding side of things.
Yeah.
You've recently started to pop up on my feed all over the place. And that's how I built this Palms podcast. You started tweeting, you're putting out threads. Like, oh, this you talked about TikTok and trying to blow up over there. It's like, you're really going for it from the personal branding angle. What got you started to say, I'm going to put myself out there?
Yeah.
After all the success.
I was forced under much duress. So we've been incredibly quiet up until this year. As a company, like, I never talked about our revenues. It was always like, well, we're privately held. We don't talk about our revenues. We don't disclose our revenues. And this year we had a planning session with a bunch of people. It was kind of like, hey, we need to start claiming our story or someone's going to do it for us. And, so we put out, I forget who carried the story first, like Bloomberg or something. Like, we put out like, hey, last year we did $550 million. And this funny thing happened, which was like, people took us a lot more seriously all of a sudden. Wow. So when I run around being like, oh, the industry needs to change and blah, 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 it was like, people are like, yeah, great. Like, thanks. You're just a tiny company. And now we're like, you know, we're larger than Beyond Meat. And we have something to say, and people are like, oh, okay, like time to pay attention. And so that helped. And then, you know, I think I have a unique perspective on being an entrepreneur and on running a company. And also we have a nuanced message. It's kind of like, hey, will you come with us on this journey to change meat? And it seems to be something that works well if I'm like out talking about it. So with the team now in a fairly good spot in terms of like, I have leadership and executives in all the roles and I trust them and whatnot. It's kind of been like, can I get myself out there more? Which is very uncomfortable. Like I had, I'll reveal this, which I don't know how your audience will react, but so I wanted to be on Twitter, right? And I'm like, I'm not gonna do this Twitter thing. Like I thought Twitter was amazing during COVID to like get real-time information on what's happening and whatnot. But anyway, I was talking to a guy and he's like, I know this ghostwriter, and I'm like, cool, like I'm going to get a ghostwriter and do a lot of stuff on Twitter. And the ghostwriter's like, look, here's the strategy. You have to be a one-trick pony until you get to 25,000 followers. And so we're just going to figure out what your one trick is. And then once you have that one trick, we'll just keep repeating it. And then once you have over 25,000 followers, you can talk about anything else, right? And so what worked was me being like, I'm Mike, and I built a $550 million company to like whatever. Here's how I did it. And I just couldn't do it anymore. Like I literally was just like, I can't have another tweet with my name on it that's like the same damn thing. It's just boring. Like I bored myself. Yeah. And so I was just like, no, we're done. Like I can't do this anymore. So I capped out at my, 7,500 followers or whatever. And now I don't like. The other thing that happened with Twitter was I went from like, I used to love Twitter for information gathering. And then it became like, I just wanted to see like validation. I wanted to see if people liked what I was saying. Like my mind just completely shifted, and I was like, "Ooh, did they like what I was saying?" And I wasn't really using it for what I was using it for before. And so I kind of backed away. Like I do tweet every once in a while on Twitter. I am looking to be on more podcasts because I enjoy it, and I think we have important stuff to say. We'll continue to talk about our numbers because I think it's helping us. And somebody said to me recently, brands don't go viral, people do. And, if you look at the numbers and basically like if you consider that we are at our max for total addressable market, we need to figure out how to dramatically increase the total addressable market. And so either I increase, which I'm trying to do, I increase like the 50% of households that would buy claim space to something higher. We try to get into retail, which we're trying to do, or we just try to convince more people to like buy direct. So we're basically trying to do all that. And I think me being out there hopefully is helping that.
It's amazing what happens when you put yourself out there and you connect with a person. I've heard of ButcherBox for the past 7 years. I was aware of it. But now that I've heard you and now meet you, I'm saying to myself, oh, I like this guy. I want to support what he's about. And it's fascinating to me that you haven't been on podcasts for so long, because you're a great speaker. You tell the story really well. You tell your own story really well, and you're coming from a good place. So I'm surprised you don't have your own podcast, but I know that running a 215 person company takes a lot of time itself, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, at least I got one customer out of this podcast, so that makes my time worth it. Again, it's really been like we didn't want to talk about ourselves, because for a while it was like, we're building something really special here without taking outside capital, which is very hard to do. Like we don't want to tip others off to the success we're having, because then it's like, whoa, we're going to build the ButcherBox, but we're going to raise a bunch of money. And so But at a certain point, we're like, all right, I think we're big enough that like, and also if people want to compete against us, I think that's a good thing.
Yes.
Because it's just growing the industry, which is what the industry needs. So.
Absolutely. Well,
yeah.
One of the things you've shared on your Twitter recently is about your 7-day water fast.
Oh yeah.
And I found that so interesting because I've never done a water fast, but I've been interested in what's that all about? How
Fucking
does that
incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Tell me about that experience.
Okay. So, last year I turned 40 and I decided that I was going to fast. And I fasted for 100 hours. And while I was fasting, I was like, this is awesome. I should do this every year as like kind of an annual tradition. And so I turned 41 in June. I hadn't done it. It was October. Was like, and I just like, I get into this kind of unconscious area where I'm not eating well. I'm, it turns out I'm drinking every night because there's all these different events and all this stuff. And it was just like, I need to just like, too much sugar. Like I just need to stop. And so I was like, time to do the fast. And so a water fast is you just have water. Although I had electrolytes too, like element electrolytes in water. But you just have water. Very easy to do, like super cheap, easy, and quite effective. So I was looking for mind, body, and spirit benefits. So mind benefits, it takes discipline, it takes determination. You feel hungry for the first couple of days. So I was interested in like just making sure that my mind could be like, no, I'm just going to keep going forward. Body, there's a lot of research around a process that happens called autophagy, which is where your body literally starts eating itself for fuel. And the theory is that your body prioritizes eating the bad cells first. So, which makes sense. So like any precancerous stuff, so it like free radical, bad cell, all those things kind of go first. And so the idea is if you can get yourself to that point of autophagy, your body is going to prioritize like eating bad stuff. So good for longevity, good for anti-cancer, good for anti-Alzheimer's, et cetera. And then spiritual, I had no idea. Like I was like, I don't know what's going to happen here, but I'm open. So I got started and I did, you know who the Liver King is?
Of course.
Yeah, of course. So he has this thing on his About Us page called the Failed Hunt. And the idea is that you do a super hard workout mimicking a hunt that went wrong, and then you don't eat. And then at the very end of it, he has a 5-day fast, you do a super hard workout, and then you gorge yourself. And so that's what I wanted to do, right? So I did the Failed Hunt. So I actually, the workout I did was because there were good waves, so I did this paddle surfing. So it was kind of like a failed spearfishing trip, but whatever. So I started, first 2 days of a water fast are really hard. You're really hungry. So it's hard. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's hard. So the first like 48 to 50 hours, tough. Then your body really shuts down its hunger. So you don't feel hungry anymore. And then, I felt pretty good. So 50 hours to 100 hours, I was tired, but I was feeling good. The only thing that happened physically, and I was like working out, I wasn't doing like cardio, but I was lifting. The only thing that happened physically was if I was laying down or if I was sitting and I got up, I would kind of have that like blackout, like I'm about to black out type of thing. So I'd have to hold on to something. Other than that, I felt totally fine. Slept really well. Like I was just kind of like good. Wow. I would sit at the table with my wife and kids while they're eating and just kind of not eat, drink my water. Like I was fine. I also drank coffee and like soda water. So my original goal was to get to 100 hours. And then I said, if I felt good at 100 hours, I was going to go for 5 days, which is only like another day. So at 100 hours, I was like, I feel good. Let's keep going. Wow. And then my outside goal was if I got to 5 days, I was going to try for 7. If I still felt good at 5, I'd go for 7. And at 5 days, I was like, I still feel good. Like, let's go for 7. So I went for 7, and did 7. and then did the super hard workout, which the last thing was like carrying these dumbbells and dragging a sled to like mimic me like dragging my prey back. And then I just like hammered some turkey soup. And you know, the most incredible thing, so body, I lost like 18 pounds.
Oh my God.
Although 8 of it came back as soon as I ate something.
Sure.
Mind, you know, I felt really proud of myself being all disciplined. Spirit, it was really quite incredible. So on day 5, I realized like, man, I am not triggered at all. I'm not angry. I have no anxiety. I'm like just kind of cool as a cucumber, like just happy, all joy. And I think like literally my body's like, oh no, don't get angry. That's going to burn too many calories. Like, no, we're just going to stay happy. Like, don't go down there. And, you know, in the conscious leadership world, they talk about, are you living above the line, which is like joy and love and gratitude, or below the line, which is fear, anxiety, and that we as humans are actually wired to be below the line most of the time. And to spend like almost 3 days above the line was such a gift. And it was like, oh, wow, this is like a version of me that I like was really attractive to me. It was like, oh, I want more of that. To the point where when I started eating, I was like, man, I really miss it. I really miss like feeling that way. And so for a little bit, I was like, oh, I should fast again. And then I was like, that's probably an eating disorder waiting to happen. Like I only feel good when I'm not eating, you know? So I still will have an annual practice. I want to do 10 days next year. And I've been incorporating like intermittent fasting more regularly into my like diet, because I kind of love the feeling of like feeling a little hungry.
Yeah. It's beautiful that it had that experience on you. And it's incredible that you've got all those benefits from that one practice. I like to end these podcasts with a challenge for people. A challenge leads us to take some action in the future where you consume something for an hour and then it's like, what can you do with that information? So what's a challenge you can leave people with to live the greatest version of their own life?
Yeah, I mean, I would just strongly suggest if you're an entrepreneur or if you're not, right? What I said was I was going to spend my New Year's doing my 3-year vision of my lifestyle design in 3 years. Like, who am I and what am I doing 3 years in the future? And how does my business or my daily activities help fuel that lifestyle? And so the challenge would be for those of your audience who want to participate in that, to spend a day or however long kind of thinking through what that looks like and actually writing it down. And then my advice is to write it down, print it out, put it somewhere so that 3 years from now you can look at it and be like, wow, either like, here's where I was off, that's kind of funny, or this is spot on, or like, you know, it's just a really great practice. And then you do it again. That's the idea. So I will be doing that now that I've said this, you know, like I'll definitely be doing this. So if other people wanted to follow along, I think that'd be awesome.
Absolutely. And it's timestamped below. So thank you so much for taking the time. And where can we send people to connect with you further?
Yeah, they can. Twitter's probably the best, at Mike Salguero, Salguero.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you as well.